back as simply untrue. He's challenged the board to a television confrontation. The board have accepted, and a live TV debate will be held next Wednesday on ITN's Channel 4 News. And 9 striking Yorkshire miners have been allowed to appeal against magistrates' bail conditions, ordering them not to picket.
The police knew the pickets would return with a vengeance today. They were prepared numerically, if not strategically. Some 3,000 striking miners waited for 4 hours. Then, after the previously set deadline for miner Brian Green's arrival had passed, a build-up of police was followed by a major confrontation. The miners were attempting to block the access road to the pit, and they succeeded.
Come on, take your bloody pictures now!
Police came under a hail of missiles from a group of miners who disobeyed strict NUM instructions.
Go on, film them. Right. Come on. No, get back. Come on, get back.
Then, in an angry reaction, police drew their truncheons and charged. 4 pickets were injured, and 19 police, though none seriously. Afterwards, the pickets accused the police of drawing their truncheons before any missiles were thrown. 2 hours after Mr. Green was due to clock on, they dispersed, knowing their picket had served its purpose. When the working miners' van finally arrived, the shift was nearly over. The NCB said only 2 hours' work was completed. The NUM can term this as a successful picket, and that's a worrying development both for the police and the coal board. In 24 weeks of the miners' strike, all previous mass pickets have failed, and this one, for the moment, has succeeded. Michael Macmillan, ITN, at Gascoigne Wood.
Police played a waiting game in the fog with roughly half as many pickets. The pickets had built 3 sturdy barricades across the approach roads to try to stop miner Jim Massey getting to work. And as the police moved in to clear them, the pickets set alight rubbish and an old car. They retreated, throwing stones at the police, who gave chase over the burning barricade. The police then found themselves confronted by another barricade across the road, topped by yet another blazing car. Scrap metal and supermarket trolleys had to be dragged clear before the fire brigade could move in to tackle the fires. The similarity between these scenes in Yorkshire and those so commonplace in Northern Ireland was quite remarkable. And the parallel became stronger as the police charged after the stone-throwing pickets, who dispersed into the gloom. The pickets had certainly caused a major disruption, but they'd failed in their primary objective to stop Jim Massey getting to work, which he did under heavy police escort. The fire brigade was able to deal quickly with the flames once the pickets had dispersed, and there was no damage caused to adjoining property by the fires. Some walls and fences, though, were ripped down. At the Allerton Bywater pit, 3 miners went into work, 1 more than yesterday, despite 2,000 pickets trying to stop them. A tragedy was averted by a hair's breadth when they were sped away from the colliery this afternoon. There were no serious injuries, and at 3 Doncaster pits, the NCB said a handful of miners were working today. At a 4th pit, 2 men tried unsuccessfully to get in. Jeremy Hands, ITN, South Yorkshire.
At Ellington Colliery in Northumberland, the aim of today's action was to stop a coach entering the pit carrying 15 deputies, members of another coal union who carry out safety work and who up to now have worked as normal with the agreement of all concerned. Picket's fury against the police reached new levels as 600 miners gathered outside Northumberland's big profit-making colliery. Today, the safety men were asked to join the strike for 1 day as a mark of solidarity, but they refused. The NUM retaliated, saying that safety cover will be prevented from taking place at all Northumberland pits from now on. One of the first to be arrested was the man involved in the struggle with Coal Board Chairman Ian McGregor, who fell to the ground during his visit to the colliery early this year. A Tyne-Tees cameraman was knocked to the ground, kicked and his equipment broken.
I'm sorry that this happens. I don't condone and never have condoned violence, and I don't agree either with, the violence that's happened to some of the pickets today, and I've seen it happen, excess force being used by the police. It isn't, violence breeds violence.
At Wearmouth Colliery in Sunderland, police outnumbered about 600 pickets, but they almost lost control when a surge of men tried to block the entrance to stop rebel miners going into work. There were 26 arrests. 1 policeman and 2 pickets were injured. Seconds later, the van carrying 11 supervisory staff in the Koza section of the NUM swept into the colliery yard. The number of men working here earlier this week was 16, but 5 men have stayed at home because, they say, 3 of their group were beaten up by pickets last night. Sheila Matheson, News at 1 at Wearmouth Colliery.
6 men going in. They were met by an equal number of police who shepherded them into a nearby field. There was no trouble and there were no arrests. 6 pickets were allowed to talk to the men going in, but they failed to persuade them.
We've took you back out, right? Come on, from Scotland, and we've accepted you in Kiveton Park. But I'm ashamed of you, absolutely ashamed on this, even. Well, I'm proud of them. Who's kicking me? Don't give me kicking me! I'm making him the mouth! You can take me!
For the first time in an industrial dispute here, police have come out in force with riot gear and horses to prevent, they say, a breach of the peace. For the first time, police have stopped the public on motorways and other roads to prevent pickets reaching a destination where the police envisage a breach of the peace will take place. For the first time, police have escorted working miners' convoys because they believe the aim of mass picketing is to physically stop them. For the first time, burning barricades have appeared in rural Yorkshire to block access roads to pits. On 2 occasions, petrol bombs have been found. The battle lines are drawn daily. Subsequent trouble has led to a total of 5,771 people being arrested. So far, less than 1,500 of those have been charged. Since the strike began, the injury toll has topped 800. Some 600 police and more than 200 pickets, all in the miners' demand for solidarity.
That's what this is all about. They're not allowing us to speak to the scabs and tell them where they're going wrong. If they would allow us to do that, we're all convinced that we could persuade them to go home.
And if those men still paid no attention to you and wished to go to work, then that would be that?
Well, the situation would develop from that. I mean, that's a purely hypothetical question, because I know that if we could let those men see that they'll never work again when we get back to work, that would work. That would do it. The presence of this vast number of police and the horses is not only provocative, it's there to intimidate men. Well, here we're seeing the police state in action. Here is it in living black and white. There it is. That's the police state.
Of local bitterness. His windows are protected by steel grills following stoning attacks. Now he says he's been forced to sell up. Striking neighbours have little sympathy.
I've shouted to her.
What have you shouted to them?
Scared, that's all. It makes you bitter, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? You fight it. I'm fighting for a lad's job. I work at pit, and I've got 3 more in my house who work at pit, and that's what it's all about, jobs.
A mile away, protection from the coal board for another working miner. These are just some of the men who've turned their back on their striking colleagues and are paying for it dearly.
There's nothing sorted out, the drift back to work will continue, and the picketing will become the minority.
What's going to happen to you?
We'll have to wait and see.
Picking up the pieces will be left to pit village policemen like Ian Wormersley. Relations with the community have been badly strained, but he hopes not irreparably so.
At the end of the day, I'm a working class lad from a working class area. Yes, I'm a policeman, and yes, I carry my duties out as a policeman would, but I've still got to talk to the people, not be condescending, and try and get involved with them, show them that you know, my interests and their interests are together.
The whole police operation will come under close scrutiny in October when a High Court hearing tests the legality of the police acting under common law to prevent what they see as a potential breach of the peace. The legalities aside, the struggle to return to normality in the pit villages can only begin when the strike ends. And when it does, the legacy of bitterness involving the police, the striking miners and the working miners will take a long time to disappear. Some say the rifts will take generations to heal. Michael Macmillan, News at 10.
For her visit to a yarn manufacturing firm at Kinross. They were in vocal mood and police carefully segregated them behind barriers. But when an egg was thrown at local Tory MP Nicholas Fairbairn, the police moved in. In the ensuing melee, 3 arrests were made, including a woman. Labour Euro MP Alex Faulkner claimed that during the disturbances, the police had pushed a child to the ground. When Mrs. Thatcher arrived, she swept past with only a few insults to worry her.
Ellingly Colliery long before dawn. They were clearly expecting trouble and were forming behind their riot shields 2 hours before the strike breakers were due to arrive at work. The police had been summoned by reports of large numbers of pickets heading for the pit. This was the largest gathering of strikers seen here since the start of the dispute. By first light, an estimated 3,000 pickets had blocked the road leading to the colliery. The police called in reinforcements by the 100. They weren't even prepared to allow the village bus to break their ranks. The driver was told to abandon her vehicle until after the working miners had been escorted in. Until now, it had been a largely peaceful protest, but the mood changed instantly with the arrival of the 2 strike breakers. Their van was spotted by one of the pickets who gave a signal on a whistle. It signalled a push from the back. When the first surge failed to break through to the strike breakers, the pickets turned their attention to the wall of riot shields. A police officer struck by a brick was one of the first casualties. As their wall buckled, the police used their truncheons on the nearest pickets. In the hand-to-hand fighting, several pickets were struck with truncheons. Others were snatched from the crowd. Singing their victory chant, the pickets made one last push. The police replied, beating the riot shields with their truncheons. The push had been halted. The miners were clearly not going to break through, but there had been casualties on both sides. This policeman was suffering from a suspected broken leg. As they left the colliery, some pickets took out their frustration on the ITN camera crew's car, which was overturned, looted and set on fire. 9 policemen and 5 pickets were injured. 1 miner was taken unconscious to hospital. Paul Davis.
At Kiveton Park Colliery near Sheffield, 8 people were arrested as trouble flared between police and pickets. 8 policemen and 1 picket were injured as 7 miners were escorted into work. That's 1 fewer than yesterday. Around 3,000 pickets had gathered at the pit, and thunder flashes, smoke bombs and missiles were thrown at the police.
2,000 of his most devoted followers. He dubbed the Dinnington Parade a march for victory, and on the eve of peace talks with the Coal Board, there was no sign of an olive branch for Ian McGregor.
His record is absolutely appalling. And if we're going to judge people, and we're going to judge standards by terms of achievement, then his record over the past 12 months means that he ought to have been made redundant any time during the course of that period.
As the applause died down, Mr. Scargill returned to his promise to remain silent about tomorrow's talks.
No comment.
Is there anything that you can say about the TUC's involvement in the talks?
No comment.
What about today's rally? How do you feel about that?
Here we have a mining community, like others throughout Britain at the present time, who are fighting simply for the right to work. They know and I know that to create unemployment costs twice as much as it does to keep them in employment. As far as we're concerned, we're going to win this battle.
Are you prepared to give any ground in the talks tomorrow at all?
No comment. You keep asking, but you'll not get an answer.
Mike Morley, IT.
Of the strike. The police had been expecting large numbers and had brought in their own reinforcements to block the road leading to the colliery entrance. The police line was pelted with rocks and bottles. 3 officers were hurt. 1 suffered a broken shoulder after being struck by a brick. The police say they also came under fire from an air gun somewhere in the crowd and from glass marbles fired by catapults. Shortly before 7 o'clock, the bus carrying the 7 strikebreakers was escorted into work past the official 6-man picket. 100 yards down the road, the main crowd had built their own makeshift barricade using branches and a road sign they'd uprooted, and stones were still being thrown at the police lines.
Stop throwing missiles! Your lost business from throwing missiles is doing you no good. You've been warned, now stop throwing missiles!
Until now, the police had been ordered to hold their position rather than attempt to arrest the stone throwers. But half an hour after the strikebreakers had gone in, they moved forward. The pickets pulled back. By now, many of their number had already gone home, and the largest picket Yorkshire has seen in the 6-month strike.
1,000 pickets massed outside the colliery, trying to prevent 6 men from going to work. Each time, the police response was to charge the pickets, forcing them further back from the pit entrance. On the front line, officers in riot gear used high-powered torches to pick out the stone throwers, and also by this time those who were now firing lead shot from catapults. In the darkness, a fearsome weapon. At 6:30, the workers' bus was escorted into the colliery. This was a signal for most of the pickets to disperse, as some stayed behind and the violence continued. There were injuries on both sides, but the tactics used by the police were criticised by the pickets, who claimed they used excessive force.
Do you know what hit you?
Well, yes, a truncheon. But I mean, it's the same as I say. I have never thrown a missile from day one, but they don't segregate them from missile throwers, do they?
Then, as if by mutual consent, it was all over for another day. The catapult missiles were collected and counted. The operation led to 6 arrests, 6 policemen injured, and 3 pickets hurt. Colin Baker, ITN, balled gun and pelted it with stones near Rossington Colliery. The driver had his nose broken. And this ambulance, which was called, was ambushed in the same way. In the darkness at Kiveton Park, police came under a hail of missiles as they and the pickets waited for 11 miners to go to work. Behind the police lines, the stones and sticks which injured 3 policemen. Ambulance men took 4 people to hospital. 1 was a picket who'd had his leg broken. As the ritual continued, the working miners entered the colliery out of sight of police and most pickets. Then the crowd, who'd numbered between 2,000 and 3,000, were marched off in single file. Michael Macmillan...
Round the corner, an upturned car blazed across a road. The youths who'd set it on fire had retreated well before the petrol tank exploded. The youths, many from outside Grimethorpe, continued sporadic stone throwing for several hours, but there was no more serious damage done. The fire brigade arrived in time to stop the flames spreading to other properties. For them, this was just a routine job, the circumstances far from usual. The village is still an angry place. The police are now seen here as the enemy. The fires and vandalism, symbols of fury and frustration.
Containing about a dozen men with a police car escort sped through the pickets outside Kinhydra Colliery. The pickets, about a dozen strong, were completely outnumbered by well over 100 police on the roadside, with perhaps the same number again in reserve parked in nearby cars. The Kinhydra Lodge officials immediately withdrew safety cover at the pit and called for similar moves throughout South Wales, saying they'd also ask NACOD's men not to cross their picket line.
The conference hall. Today's meeting was designed as a morale booster following the breakdown of the ACAS talks. The miners wanted reassurance from the delegates that they would take as tough a line as the coal board, that there'd be no compromise over pit closures. but it's a sign of the bitterness generated by this dispute that the crowd turned hostile when Trevor Bell, a right-wing member of the executive, arrived. And that in turn became a confrontation with the police.
Come on, then.
The police called in reinforcements, and the crowd had calmed down by the time the miners' leader, Arthur Scargill, arrived to a hero's welcome. He can expect a cooler reception inside, where delegates will be looking for ways of stepping up the dispute through the winter.
Dissension is likely to be muted at today's meeting, and there's no doubt that the delegates will endorse the tough line taken by the NUM's leadership in the fight against pit closures. But the delegates themselves will have a tough time when they get back to the pits, stopping the flow of men who want to go back to work and convincing them that it's worth fighting on through the winter, especially when the coal board is offering such general financial incentives for the men to return to work.
Eluding the massive picket which gathered 2 hours later, still believing the man would arrive at 6 o'clock. On one side, 4,000 pickets, angry but uncertain about the next move. On the other, 1,000 police with riot shields, horses and dogs. Bricks and ball bearings fired from catapults began to fall among the police commanding the mine entrance. Like yesterday, mounted police were sent forward to disperse the crowd. Suddenly, down the road towards the police lines came a workman's caravan, set free by some of the crowd. As it careered steadily towards the police, one of their Range Rovers sped forwards and rammed into the trailer, halting it in the curb. Minutes later, a workman's cabin was dragged forward and set ablaze, while missiles, including milk bottles, continued to rain down. The miner who went to work today was said to be 23, married with 2 children. He's been spirited out of his village home to an unknown address. As an underground train guard, he will not be producing any coal. As the police pressed forward, the workman's hut still blazing in the road, the morning light lifting, there was a new tactic for dispersal. 2 police Range Rovers circling rapidly among the now ragged ranks of pickets, some continuing to find and hurl missiles amid the mist and turmoil. An injured policeman, hit in the back by a brick, was carried to an ambulance on a colleague's riot shield. Later, he was released from hospital. One thing is clear, the attempt this week to bring the first working miner back into Cortonwood has been at a considerable cost to this community. It remains to be seen whether that working miner's example will be followed by others next week. For the moment, the villagers of Brampton, the heart of the pit community, were left to wonder at the bitter and damaging consequences of the battle for the hearts and minds.
Escorted into the pit unexpectedly at 3 a.m, a deliberate police tactic to guarantee his safety. 3 hours later, a massive build-up of pickets. A confrontation which senior South Yorkshire police officers believed would be inevitable this morning. In the darkness, highlighted by a burning porter cabin which pickets set ablaze, police said they were attacked by air guns, catapults and other missiles. The order to deploy support units in full riot gear, say the police, was unavoidable in the face of the size and temperament of the pickets. At least 4,000 strike supporters, according to police reports, were involved in the disturbances. Attempts by Land Rovers to break up the trouble were met with resistance. A mounted police charge broke up the main thrust into smaller groups. But it was the presence of horses and the numbers of police at the pit which local miners' leaders say provoked the riot. By daybreak, several hundred pickets were still refusing to disperse. This 4 hours after the miner had got into the colliery. As Cortonwood woke to the scenes of civil disorder, a postwoman squeezed through the riot squads, her round to be completed come what may. By now, a small but determined group of men posing a threat and forcing a rare retreat from the police. Afterwards, both sides blamed one another for the violence.
He gave us 30 seconds to disperse, and before he got it out in his mouth, they were opening up and letting horses through. And the whole police watch were saying it was disgusting.
It was a stalemate situation. We did nothing but contain
the picket at the pit gates, and then we came on the stoning and use of catapults.
4 police officers were hurt, 1 miner arrested. Police admit they wanted to arrest more, but were unable to move close enough to pickets. By the time the miner finished work, it was all over. Corton Wood was peaceful again. Brent Sadler, News at 1, Yorkshire.
Pits. A co-op shop was set on fire in Corton Wood. Other stores were looted and telegraph poles were torn down and set on fire. The police station at Dinnington was stoned by around 40 people who besieged the building, hurling various missiles at it. And at the nearby colliery, 5-inch bolts, metal staves and spears were thrown at the police. They discovered a milk crate packed with petrol bombs. At least 30 pickets have been arrested in what police have described as a night of chaos.
On a dozen pits in South Yorkshire, a fusillade of missiles showered on police at Dinnington, including scores of deadly steel bolts. 5 of the 33 policemen injured throughout the coalfield were hit as they advanced along Dinnington Main Street. About 200 pickets had set fire to a car in the middle of the road. But as police with riot shields and truncheons moved forward, the crowd melted away into the darkness. It was the first time in 8 months that pickets had spread themselves thinly across the coalfield rather than concentrate on one colliery. Firemen doused the car as the police changed their plans to get the working miners into the pit, which had been solidly strike-bound since the dispute began. 10 miles away at Maltby, a police motorcade with lights flashing raced towards the pit to scatter pickets. A petrol filling station was among the property vandalised and looted, and the same happened at Corton Wood, where the mob broke into a supermarket and dragged out material for a barricade. In all, police made 45 arrests in the widespread but sporadic fighting. Some of the worst violence was at Corton Wood, the Yorkshire pit whose closure triggered the whole dispute. Police believe there's a new hand directing these attacks. At Corton Wood, a petrol bomb exploded in front of one vehicle. Police recovered a complete bomb-making kit, milk bottles, a canister of petrol, and a device already primed with a rag fuse soaked in petrol. Another device exploded harmlessly outside Dinnington Police Station. These attacks are seen as another sinister development to this lengthy confrontation. The spread and scale of the violence leads the police to believe that it was part of a coordinated plan to sabotage the operation to ferry Yorkshire miners back to work. It was hit-and-run mob destruction in pit villages deemed vulnerable to the strikebreakers. And the police think that it could happen again every morning during this crucial week. At Hickleton Pit near Doncaster, the cars of Coalboard staff were overturned and set on fire. Another example of the escalating violence that now characterises the strike in the important Yorkshire.
Man who was escorted to work in the early hours of each morning, police today found themselves facing up to angry pickets shortly after midnight. The mob's armoury included petrol bombs, which forced the police to keep their distance for much of the time. One was thrown but failed to explode. Then, in a bid to clear the colliery entrance to allow a total of 4 miners back to work, the police charged forward, scattering the crowds. The first of 13 arrests was made. Bewildered residents, kept awake by the constant noise, watched from behind curtains as police gradually took control of the area. As the horses and riot gear returned, officers seized a milk crate of petrol bombs, all primed and ready to be used. A heavy roller had been pushed downhill towards police lines. Firemen were now able to move into a derelict house which had been set alight. Next door, a shop had been attacked, its few contents looted. By daylight, the police were able to see the stacks of bricks which had been intended for them, and the cords which had been stretched between lampposts designed to bring down their charging horses. But by now, the streets were virtually empty. The few hundred pickets who'd surprised police with their new tactics had long moved on to other mining areas.
Police riot units chased mobs throughout the night. They were permanently on the move, breaking up groups of rioters and looters who struck at 10 pits and villages. At Dinnington, the police station was evacuated after rioters stoned the building. 4 policemen and a woman were trapped before they could safely get away. As well as bricks and stones, a petrol bomb was thrown through a window, but it failed to go off. A few hundred yards down the road, an electrical shop was looted. At least £1,000 worth of portable radios and televisions were taken. The police who encircled the pit said tension was running high after rumours that the colliery, strike-bound since the start of the dispute, would be seeing the first men return to work. Shortly before the miners arrived, police were attacked with huge steel bolts, new ammunition which senior officers said was used repeatedly on this night of senseless violence.
What we've seen tonight is not picketing, it's been wanton violence, wanton destruction of property right the way across the county. Some of them might be miners. I'm not saying they're all not miners, some of them might be, but I'm talking about the 18 to 21-year-old. Basically, those are the people who are causing the trouble.
Do you expect this will continue for the rest of the week?
Yes, I think we've started on a pattern in this county which will be difficult to change.
And then the convoy, bringing the first 14 men to work. As striking miners and their families were herded away, there was a hardening of attitudes and counterclaims. What happened to your husband?
He got one of these thrown at him by the other side of the police, plus a truncheon in his face. That's what they're doing to us.
You remain solid?
Oh, bloody, I'm solid. I'm more solid now than I were before.
As long as it takes?
Yes, sir.
Through Christmas?
Yeah. And through next Christmas if it comes to that.
Outside the pit gates, a car was set on fire, but by far the most vivid scenes of disorder were to be found on a main road blocked by streetlights. At least 20 lamps along a 3/4-mile stretch of road were knocked down. This prevented the mobile riot squads from giving immediate chase. More outbreaks of violence followed, and police were stretched to get to trouble spots in time. They failed to prevent a raid on a second police station at Maltby. And local officers were so outnumbered that they didn't have enough men to prevent a garage being broken into. When reinforcements did arrive, they discovered widespread damage in the town. Police casualties numbered at least 30, fewer than might have been expected. At least 45 people were arrested and crates of petrol bombs taken in for forensic examination. It was a night of chaos, which the police say only damages mining communities, not the police or the coal board. Brent Sadler, News at 1.
Charged pickets after a petrol bomb was thrown. There were a number of arrests. For the first time, 14 men clocked on for work at Dinnington Colliery. In the ensuing violence, a car was set on fire and burning barricades erected. For a time, the village police station also came under attack. Police say a petrol bomb was thrown into the yard and the building and officers outside pelted with stones and other missiles.
These are the bolts that were thrown at the officers who were originally on duty outside Dinnington police station. When the advance to a large number of pickets had gathered about 200 yards from the pit entrance, they came under a barrage of these bolts, and several police officers have been injured, some quite seriously, and are now in hospital.
In all, more than 30 police officers were hurt and a number of pickets. Police say 45 people were arrested, and at a press conference later this morning, South Yorkshire's Chief Constable dismissed claims by the NUM that the heavy police presence had sparked off the violence in the South Yorkshire coalfield last night. From the start of police operations, it became clear that senior officers were anxious to avoid a large-scale repetition of Monday's violence. Colliery entrances were kept clear, whilst officers patrolled surrounding fields. In the streets of the pit villages, mobile support units kept pickets and residents on the move. In the convoy to Thurcroft pit, 33 NUM members, 11 of them new starters. But the constant police presence brought anger from those who feared the move might provoke fresh trouble.
There wouldn't be trouble if the police weren't here.
Even police
If they just let the lads picket, there wouldn't be any trouble.
Well, please.
Trouble did flare in several areas, including Barrow, where police were stoned and power lines brought down, cutting off supplies to the villages of Worsborough and Ward Green. At Dinnington, where there'd been angry clashes 24 hours earlier, police road checks were mounted at each end of the village, with every car stopped and questioned. Earlier, police had reported steel wires stretched across the road, but at the pit gates, where around 100 pickets were heavily outnumbered, there was no trouble. The convoy, carrying 17 men into work, swept through without incident. The same was true at Maltby, where 15 men reported for work. That's 2 more than yesterday. In Brampton, police brought 4 men out of Corton Wood pit before pickets could assemble.
Officers maintained a low-key presence throughout the morning in an obvious attempt to cool the anger felt against the police here. But that anger still remains in Brampton and throughout the county. An uneasy calm may have returned, but both sides are well aware that a further flashpoint could occur at any time.
Another 3 men returned to work at Park Mill Colliery at Clayton West near Huddersfield today, bringing the total to 10. Again, they were transported into the pit in a transit van escorted by police. Although there was no trouble on the picket line, the police presence this morning was much greater than yesterday. Just over 30 pickets were waiting outside the colliery and pushed forward jeering as the van
sent on an 8-mile chase across country to the Prince of Wales pit, where the coal board said 1,000 pickets had gathered. Relations between the police and pickets were clearly strained. Minutes before the men arrived for work, they forced back the picket lines. Greater numbers of riot teams were rushed in, although the numbers of pickets visible on the road numbered no more than 150. 9 miners, an increase of 2 on yesterday, reported in. The police then moved immediately against the pickets and came under attack by stones. The search moved on to a railway embankment, and to their surprise, the police found 1 man.
There's one here! One here, look here! Have you got one? Look here! Oh, dear.
There were excuses, the officers had none of it, and arrest was automatic. Brent Sadler, News at 10, West Yorkshire.
A massive police escort signalled the arrival of a green coach carrying just 1 man back to work for the first time at the small, close-knit Goldthorpe Colliery. For the handful of bewildered pickets, his colleagues, it was a bitter blow. Hundreds of policemen dressed in riot gear followed the coach in to make certain this 1 man went to work. Safely inside, he leapt out of the vehicle, ignoring pleas to talk to NUM officials. Dozens of police were then marched across the forecourt as a few more pickets arrived. They were baffled by what was happening.
There's about 150 police here this morning, and there's 8 of us here. I don't know why there's all these police here.
The answer came 5 hours later, by which time a similar amount of pickets had gathered, all aware the strike had cracked. As the lone worker was driven home, tempers snapped, and the pushing and shoving turned to fighting and stone throwing. Police swarmed through the main street, scattering crowds as they went. In all, 9 people were arrested. Shoppers had long cleared the pavements, sensing that this would happen. Many of them blamed the police for causing it by drafting in so many to protect just 1 person. Tonight, the atmosphere remains tense. Police are still out in force. Terry Lloyd, News at 10, Goldthorpe. Rolling fog throughout the night meant added problems for the police, who were unable to check the pickets' undercover operations. At Goldthorpe, the scene of yesterday's confrontations, riot squads found piles of rubble which they believe would have been used to attack them. Nearby at Frickley Colliery, a complex roadblock had been laid with bricks from a nearby building site strewn across the road. Further on, a huge barricade which had appeared during the night completely blocked the country lane. For the second night running, oil was poured along the pit road at Houghton, Maine, making driving treacherous for the police convoy which arrived minutes later. Back at Goldthorpe, more police were lining the streets in readiness for the arrival of the 1 worker who reported back yesterday. He was driven in, lying across the back seat of a van shortly after 7 o'clock. The crowds booed and jeered, and then the now familiar stone throwing started up once again. Officers sheltered behind riot shields, fending off the hail of missiles. Eventually, the order was given to charge. As the police surged forward, dropping shields and drawing truncheons, the pickets fled into back streets and alleyways. A television cameraman was amongst the injured, and there were 2 arrests. But within a matter of minutes, Goldthorpe was back under control. Terry Lloyd, ITN, and alongside a railway bridge. As they set about the job, several sections of railway track were thrown down on top of them from a height of 30 feet. A police vehicle took the full impact from one of them, but no one was injured. Police said it was an amazing escape. The railway line was so heavy, it took 7 men to lift each piece and haul it clear of the roadway which led to the nearby pit. Other officers were used to scour the area in a vain bid to find their attackers. And at nearby Asken Colliery, riot police were drafted in after the shower block windows were smashed by stone throwers. Just outside the pit entrance, a crowd stayed put, refusing to go back home. Eventually, police decided to retreat rather than provoke more trouble by standing in full view wearing riot gear. But as they did, the stone throwing started again. A charge was ordered to clear the lane, and as the police went forward, one of their men was hit on the shoulder by a brick. But here, as with most other pits in the area, miners managed to get to work. Now only 4 pits are solidly on strike. Terry Lloyd, ITN, Yorkshire. Barricades had already been built across the pit entrance and set alight. A bulldozer was brought in to clear the blazing debris, but as one barricade went down, another went up. A crowd of youths was already pulling down a lamppost to block the main approach road 100 yards away. Police reinforcements charged along the lane, coming under heavy stone throwing as they ran. But the crowd of about 30 soon scattered, leaving officers to clear up the latest obstacle in relative safety. The police had trapped the crowd on both sides, forcing them to flee across fields. 12 were arrested. When the convoy carrying 6 working miners arrived, more than 1,000 pickets had gathered to shout and jeer, but they remained peaceful. Later, they claimed it was the police, not them, who had turned provocative by deliberately setting the official picket's hut on fire. A county councillor who works at the pit said he saw them do it.
I've just watched them set fire to a picket at what's been there 9 months, and I'm going to find out why they've done that, why they've burnt down a hut what's been there 9 months, a peaceful town, and these people from London and all over the country, these police come into our town and cause trouble, and then can wantonly arson a building and get away with it.
The police denied it, saying that a small fire had been started inside the hut by the pickets themselves. Terry Lloyd, ITN.
Could we all 3 minutes silence, please?
There followed a scene rare on a picket line as the official called for 3 minutes silence to remember all those who had died in the strike. Police and pickets stood in silence in the downpour.
Thank you very much, boys.
But the moment of calm was soon over, and as the convoy arrived, the scene became more familiar. This time the owner of the taxi firm, one of whose drivers was killed doing the same run on Friday, brought 2 working miners to the pit. The pickets surged forward.
Bastards! Come!
The police held them back, and a moment later the empty convoy left to more shouts. John Suchet, News at 10.
But then the conflict was more verbal than physical.
This overtime ban has been spectacularly successful. We've already lost approaching 4 million tonnes of coal in the mining industry and around 150 to 200 million pounds. Now that's quite devastating.
Well, they're actually helping us execute something that we had to do anyway, which is to try to get our production down.
For the NCB, the problem was uneconomic pits. And in early March, Ian McGregor announced plans to shed 20,000 miners' jobs within the year. At the same time, he was publicising the board's latest coalfield in the Vale of Beaver.
Today we are looking at the future.
Are there any circumstances whatsoever in which you'd be prepared to think again about closing those pits, or at least modify those plans?
I act on behalf of you, the taxpayers, who I think are getting a little tired of putting out so much money just to keep these mines going when you don't need them.
But the miners feared not only lost jobs, but lost communities.
There's no jobs around this area. There's only pits holding this area together. If this pit goes, it'll be like a plague all up valley.
Within days, a strike with official backing.
The National Executive Committee declare the proposed strike action in Yorkshire and Scotland and in any other area which takes similar action as official.
By resting his case on local decisions, Arthur Scargill bypassed the NUM's rule that a national strike needs a national ballot. This decision was deeply resented by many miners.
Well, put it this way, there's no ballot. There's no ballot. They're entitled to a ballot. They're not giving us opportunity to go for one.
But if there was a ballot and all your colleagues decided they wanted to strike, would you be happy to strike?
Yeah, if that's the majority of the men, yeah.
Would that happen?
I don't think so.
What's it going to be like here on Monday morning?
Well, it's going to be touch and go, I think, really. There's going to be a lot of animosity, surely.
From the start, some miners chose to strike and some did not. And to areas that did not strike, like Nottinghamshire, came busloads of flying pickets. The Coal Board took out an injunction against the pickets under Mrs Thatcher's employment legislation, but never enforced it.
No, shall picket no matter what she says, and I'm going to tell you something else if she hopes she's watching. I'm going to tell you something else. Tell her this. When we've got pits out, we're going to get stuck back into power stations and give them some umpy. And get them out. And all these blacklegs that's sneaking in now with lorries, taking coal to power stations, which I saw on this morning, we shall have them and all.
We witnessed on our screens as the ritual push and shove at the picket line spilled over into something more serious. Hard after the flying pickets, the flying police. Coordinated from London, the police were bussed around the country into areas where the local police were under pressure.
Leicestershire, Derbyshire and Staffordshire forces have advised us that probably as from Sunday they may well be coming to us for some aid.
The policing of the strike was to become one of the bitterest arguments of the year.
I'm saying that the police presence in North and South Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire at the present time is unwarranted and unprecedented.
Craig.
Steelworks were vulnerable. Without coal, their blast furnaces would become unworkable. But the steelmen willingly worked with the coal that was willingly brought by the lorries, many of whose drivers were members of the T&G.
In my town alone, there's that many unemployed. If I don't do it, somebody else will do it. I've been out of work 15 months, so I have to have a job.
A May Day rally in Nottinghamshire. Pent-up passion between strikers and working miners. Ray Chadburn, Nottinghamshire NUM leader.
Where you gonna go? You're gonna go nowhere or you'll be scrappy.
For Arthur Scargill, a gallows. For the police, reinforcements. And for the pickets, a rallying cry from an earlier dispute.
I'm asking my members to now come and picket the Orgreave coking works in massive numbers. I want to see a picket line as big as the one at Saltley in 1972.
The lorries continued to bring coal to Orgreave and take away coke for the steelworks, despite the presence of thousands of pickets contained by thousands of police.
Get moving, move. Get moving. Come on, go.
No way.
Listen, move.
No way.
Listen.
No way.
You're blocking the footpath. Right, arrest him then. He's under arrest.
Arthur Scargill was charged with obstruction and later in the year fined £250.
Excuse me, please. An industrial dispute took on the appearance of a military confrontation. There were 6,000 pickets drawn from all over the country, 5,000 police, and riot gear was used for the first time in the dispute. Police tactics were well planned. A pitched battle raged. The police made over 100 arrests. 52 pickets were hurt. So were 29 policemen. Despite the morning's fury, the Orgreave coke convoy succeeded in leaving for Scunthorpe Steelworks. The violence continued for several hours. After the police and the pickets had withdrawn, the Assistant Chief Constable of Yorkshire said it was a miracle no one had been killed at Orgreave.
Unashamedly determined and dogmatic, Arthur Scargill led the miners into Britain's biggest ever industrial battle. Elected president of the NUM until the year 2003, His background, he was a miner at the age of 15, made clashes with the new coal board chairman seem inevitable. The wealthy 72-year-old American Ian McGregor had desperately tried to identify himself with Mr. Scargill's supporters, but relations had clearly broken down even before the strike began. Mrs. Thatcher had appointed him head of the coal board to make it pay, but his strategy of closing what he called uneconomic pits by offering excellent redundancy or transfers would unavoidably destroy many mining communities. It was at this colliery at Cortonwood in South Yorkshire last March that the dispute began. Ian McGregor said it had to close because the board couldn't sell the high-quality coking coal the miners were producing. The temperature was right. For the miners, it was now or never. In the darkness of a cold March morning, the trouble had started. In Yorkshire, initial splits over the strike were short-lived. In Sheffield, the strength of the Yorkshire, Scottish and Welsh miners failed to sway the men from Nottinghamshire, as Mr. Scargill and the NUM executive reaffirmed the decision not to hold a national ballot. The Nottinghamshire men became a focus of hatred. The striking miners attacked union officials Henry Richardson and Ray Chadburn for failing to bring their men out.
Look, clear off, it's all being distorted. Take the bloody things away.
The spotlight moved. Striking miners travelled south to prevent Nottinghamshire miners going to work. But local police, in what became a controversial tactic, turned them back. By now, the police had mobilised as never before. Men from southern forces were flown north. The NUM called it a national police force. For the first time, the police were in the middle, separating working and striking miners. Pressurised by the NUM executive, Nottinghamshire leaders tried to get their men out. This was the response. Mr. Chadburn was outvoted. Most men wanted a national ballot and rejected this final plea to join the strike. For the striking miners, the battle for Nottinghamshire was lost. In April, any threat of power cuts diminished. The summer had started early, and memories of 1974 and the three-day week were distant. But even in June, Mr. Scargill was adamant that power cuts would be unavoidable.
I can tell you that the CEGB, in conjunction with the government, are preparing for presentation to Parliament emergency measures for power cuts on a rota basis as they go into August and September.
Many train drivers defied ASLEF instructions not to move coal, but pickets tried to stop supplies carried by road. Now the miners' target was the steelmen, who'd ignored their strike. Pickets arrived in force at plants in Yorkshire, South Wales and Scotland. The steelmen wouldn't budge.
We want to support as much as we can, but I'm not here to see the steel industry crucified on somebody else's altar.
At Orgreave Coking Works, Mr. Scargill rallied his men. What followed was the country's worst picket line confrontation for 60 years.
I must tell you that what we've got is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law.
I hold him responsible for what happens. He leads the union. I think the authorities should go after him and his colleagues because of the obvious orchestration of the violence that's going on in this country.
1984, Great Britain.
Okay, lads.
Mining villages were torn apart by the dispute. In Sharbrook, North Derbyshire, police guarded working miners' buses. Striking families could never forgive them. In August, the pickets rushed to stop the first Yorkshire miner returning to work. At Gascoigne Wood near Selby, they very nearly succeeded.
Come on, take your bloody pictures now!
As the pickets were scattered, Coal Board spokesman Michael Eaton made this prediction.
I think the evidence is such that we could look for the strike to end earlier than we thought and around the end of September, yes.
Defiantly, Mr. Scargill marched to Brighton and the TUC conference to demand support. He knew one national dock strike had crumbled. A second was shortly to end. The TUC made promises, but the crucial unions wouldn't deliver.
The electricity supply industry is not and never has been available to solve industrial disputes external to it. Not even for the miners.
With the strike heading for winter, the two sides knew the pressure was on for a settlement. From a Scottish hotel to a Doncaster rope factory, and finally to the conciliation service ACAS, the personalities clashed.
We do produce the cheapest deep mine coal in the world. We have the most sophisticated and technologically advanced industry in the world, and it's a tragedy that our industry is now being treated in this way.
That's absolute rubbish. It's like so many other things he says, total rubbish.
Have you any news to tell us?
Britain can no longer afford Ian McGregor. It's time he departed.
We're looking for a more reasonable attitude on the part of the NUM, who to date have done nothing to help solve this strike.
For the first time ever, they appeared side by side on the steps of an Edinburgh hotel. Could they have reached agreement? Well, yes, but not on the strike.
The only thing I want to say, and this represents both the Coal Board and the union, is that the media harassment today has made it impossible for these talks to continue at this venue.
Striving to break the deadlock, Labour leader Neil Kinnock had sent his energy spokesman as a mediator. He wanted to side with the miners.
If the son and the grandson and the great-grandson of coal miners can't be the miners' friend, nobody's going to be the miners' friend.
Appearances were important.
We're all friends.
But later at the Labour Party conference, Mr. Kinnock had to distance himself. He acknowledged public disquiet over picket line violence.
I condemn violence. I abominate violence. I damn violence. All violence. All violence without fear or favour. That's what makes me different from Margaret Thatcher. I don't have her double standards.
The trouble continued. In November, tempers ran high when it seemed the strike was breaking. Large numbers of miners returned to work attracted by Christmas bonuses. And at the same time, legal action by working miners led to the seizure of NUM assets. Christmas approached, and in the pit villages, children of working and striking miners sang together. For a moment, the picket lines were forgotten. But at Cortonwood Colliery, where it all began, the slogans are the same. 63% of the country's miners are still on strike, and their battle is far from over.
Well, sure, as long as it takes. Because there's no way I'm going back under their terms. We'll be here next Christmas if necessary, and the Christmas after that as well if they want.
Whatever the